Hello and welcome to this tutorial. My name is Daniel Broadway and today I'm going to be showing you how to create a realistic planet in Photoshop, this time Earth. So the first thing we need to do is get some good imagery for our Earth. So let's go to Google. Let's type in Blue Marble NASA. You'll see this first link is Blue Marble Earth Observatory. So let's click that. And you'll see we got some imagery here, but the imagery we're interested in is actually under Visible Earth. So let's go to Visible Earth. And you'll see they have all of these different various images of the Earth from satellite imagery that we can use as a base to start from. But the only ones we're interested in is one of these color images, and any one you want really. And then on the last page there is the clouds. So just click the clouds and you can download it from there. Any one of these options is fine, whatever you want to do, but try to make sure they're all the same resolution. And you may need to use Photoshop to resize them all to match. And then of course one of these color images is fine. I'm going to do the 5400 by 2700. So let's get those images into Photoshop and get started. So here we are now, and one of the first things I do before I make an effect is I always look up reference, and this is an image from the 1960s during one of the Apollo missions where the Earth was photographed, and it provides a very good basis to compare what we're doing to try to match this. So the big things I notice here are the depth of the clouds. So if we zoom in here a little bit, notice that the clouds actually have height, and they're not just a flat kind of texture. And the clouds also cast shadows onto the surface of the Earth. So we want to mimic both of those attributes. And the other thing that a lot of people don't notice or don't replicate is if you notice this shadow terminator here where the Earth is getting darker from the light, you'll actually see like a red and orange tint, and that is actually the phenomenon of a sunset in that region of the Earth, just where it becomes dark. So we're going to replicate that as well. So let's get started with our own Photoshop Earth. So let's go ahead and open the image. I want the Earth color to start with, and I've gone ahead and resized all of my images to 5400 by 2700. So here we have our colored Earth, and it's the satellite imagery from NASA. Now the thing is, NASA has removed the effects of atmospheric hazing that you would see from space, because when you look at the Earth from space, you're looking through about 60-70 miles of atmosphere to the ground. But this image is now a true color image without any atmospheric contaminant. However, for realistic rendering of the Earth from space, we want to actually add that atmospheric hazing back in. So what we're going to do is create a blue color above and adjust its opacity to kind of haze out the colors here. For a more realistic look though, we're going to switch to 32-bit just for a second. I'm not going to go into the details about this, but it's basically a linear workflow issue. You can look that up elsewhere if you'd like. I'm not going to go into it here. But we're going to switch to 32 bits. And I'm going to create a new layer. We're going to call it Atmosphere. Okay. Now, we want to pick a bluish color because the atmosphere and the Earth, of course, look blue. The sky is blue. So we want to go to here. We want to adjust our colors to red 0. Green 75, and blue can stay at 255, and that gives us a nice earthy atmosphere color. So let's hit OK. Let's go to Edit, Fill, hit OK. And now we have our solid fill with this layer. So let's take the opacity all the way down to 0. And we have our Earth here. So let's just kind of look at the ground here, and we're going to gently raise the opacity. You'll notice this is lightening the ocean too, so a lot of the ocean look from space is also determined by the brightness of the atmosphere. So let's just stop around, let's say 10%. Well, I don't know, let's do 8. A 7's fine. So we'll call it there. Now we've got a nice hazing of our ground as seen through the atmosphere. So here's the difference. You see it's a pretty significant change. So let's go ahead and merge it back down. So now our ground is colored appropriately, and let's click this to make it a layer. So we'll call this ground. Oh, misspelled it there. Ground. Okay. Let's switch back to 8 bits now that we've done that. So we don't want to merge, hit don't merge. Zoom out. Okay. So what we want to do now is take this ground image and make it spherical. So what we can do is go to, so let's zoom out actually a little more. Go to our lasso tool, excuse me, marquee tool, not lasso tool. We're going to switch the elliptical marquee tool. In the middle, don't go all the way to the edges, but just kind of near the edges, start drawing one. And if you see, I can move the elliptical around, but to hold it to a circle, let's hold down Shift. And now that'll hold it to a circle, as you see. So let's just kind of pick an area that can be our Earth right here. And we're going to select inverse and just hit delete. And that gives us a circled Earth for a second. So let's take our select and actually invert it again so that the Earth is selected again. Let's go to filter, distort, spherize. And if you zoom out here, you can see that it's distorting the Earth. So just hit it OK once. And now our ground has been kind of wrapped around to look like a sphere. So let's deselect that. Let's open the Earth specular map. Actually, we'll go ahead and do that. We're going to do all three of these here. So this is the Earth specular map. Again, this is going to control kind of the brightness of the ocean reflections, because from space, water is reflective, so it would reflect the sun back. So hit Control A to select everything, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. So let's control click our ground layer, which will give us that circle selection again, you see? And we'll hit the layer mask button here, and that gives us a selection again, and then we can just kind of trash the layer mask now and apply it. Let's again control click. Let me just name this Ocean Specular. Let's again control click our Ocean Specular now that we have that circle selection. Again, you go to filter, distort, spherize, hit OK. And now we have the mask lining up with the Earth bottom. We need to do this one more time, so we're going to close out the specular map there. Let's go to File, Open, Clouds. We want to do the same thing we've just done with the clouds. So again, the clouds are flat. So let's go Control A, Control C, go back to our main work project here and hit Control V. Now the clouds are pasted in. Again, control click either the ground or ocean to get the selection. Select this, activate layer mask, and then trash the layer mask. Okay, I'm going to rename this clouds. Let's control click the clouds. Let's again filter, distort, spherize, and now our clouds are wrapped into a sphere. So what we need to do now is get the black areas of this cloud map to be transparent and keep the white areas. Now, you could try to do a color range selection, but that's not going to really look as good because once you delete it out, you're going to still have dark edges. But what we can do is use this black and white map as an alpha to fill another layer with clouds. So let's do that. Let's hit Control A to select everything, Control C, and let's create a new alpha. And in this alpha, let's go to Edit, Paste Special, and Paste in Place. Now if you just paste it, it'll offset the clouds, which is not what we want. So we need Paste Special, Paste in Place. So now we have that here, let's control click the alpha to select the clouds, and now you'll see we have a selection where the clouds are. And that's going to be good for us. So let's create a new layer. We're going to call it Clouds, because we're going to actually get rid of this here in a minute. Let's make a white color, pure white. Let's paste it, or excuse me, let's fill. We want to fill our selection. And now we can hide the one underneath and the specular. Let's hide that. So now what we've got is the clouds over the Earth. And that's looking pretty good. So now we can get rid of this because we don't need it anymore because we were just using it for a selection. So now that we've got the clouds sorted, let's go ahead and put a black background behind everything just to kind of make it look like space. And let's go ahead and also make the lighting on the Earth and the shadows falling across it. So let's create a new layer. We're going to name it background. Let's drag it underneath, switch this to black, edit, fill, and fill it with black. Okay. Let's make a new layer also on top of everything. We're going to call this shadow. What we're going to do is control click the ground to get our circle selection. Then we're just going to fill it also with black. And there's the earth covered completely in shadow. But that's not what we want. We want to have a bit of a crescent look, kind of like in our reference. So let's click the selection tool here. Let's just start scooting our shadow around. Let's say about right there is fine. You know, just wherever you want. And I'm actually going to go to select, transform selection, and then just kind of pull this up a little bit, pull this down a little bit, just to kind of follow that contour a little better. And I'm going to apply that selection. So now I'm going to feather this selection so that we get a feathered shadow on the edge to look like a sphere. So let's go to select, modify, feather. Let's do 75. Hit OK. And what we want to do is get rid of the shadow here, but keep it inside the circle. So let's actually select, inverse, delete, and hit deselect there. So now we've got a cool shadow. Now you may be able to notice that we have a bit of an edge of the underneath layers peeking through that shadow, but don't worry about that right now. We're going to fix that. So the next thing we want to do is add a little specular highlight on the ocean to show that the ocean is reflective and that the sun is reflecting off there. So that's where the specular layer comes back in. So let's turn off the clouds and shadow just to look at this. Let's turn on the ocean specular. And again, we want to select the areas of white, but not the areas of black, because the ground would not reflect the sun because the ground doesn't have a reflective property. But again, the color range selector would probably not be best here. So let's again hit Control A to select everything, Control C. And then in the channels again, we're going to go, just like we did before with the clouds, we're going to go Edit, Paste Special, Paste into Place. Then we're going to Control click the alpha. And now our ocean is selected perfectly and our ground is not. So let's go back to our layers, create a new layer. We're going to call it Specular Reflection. Reflection. And let's just hide our ocean specular underneath so we can kind of see what we're doing here. And let's just go in here to the edge so we got a nice little area to do it with. Let's use our gradient tool. And let's flip our color so that this is white, this is black. But we don't want a full white color. We want like an orange yellowish, because the sun is sort of that color. So let's just kind of drag, you know, you can see I'm dragging up here to create different saturations. So let's just keep it really close to white, but still kind of orangish. Hit OK. And now we want to switch this mode to radial mode on the gradient tool so that we don't draw a straight gradient. We want a radial gradient. Let's click that. And then just right here, just kind of drag out a little ways. And now you've got a cool ocean reflection. Let's look at that out full. That's probably a little too big, so I'm going to undo the gradient and draw it again. Make it a little tighter. It's too tight. It's just kind of have to kind of feel it out here. Well, let's go with that. Yeah, that's fine. So let's select, deselect, and now we've got a cool little ocean highlight. And we can turn our clouds back on, and we can turn our shadow back on, and now we've got a really nice little highlight to make the earth look a little shiny in the ocean, which is pretty cool. And you know, if you don't like it that intense, you can adjust the opacity down to kind of, you know, maybe you don't want a full reflective. So I'm going to leave it about right, 70% and say, okay. So we're starting to really get there now. But we want to create that cloud shadow look. So I'm going to actually duplicate the clouds. I'm going to rename the layer Cloud Shadow, drag it back underneath the clouds. I'm going to go to Layer, Layer Style, Color Overlay, and that's going to automatically fill the clouds with red. And let's just leave it like that just for a second to place them so we can really see them. And I'm going to drag the shadow to the left with the arrow keys to kind of offset them. You see how I'm offsetting them? We don't want to offset it a lot though. So let's offset it just a little bit. Let's drag it back. So we're talking just a few pixels, probably something like this. And now of course we don't want that awful red. So let's click color overlay. And then let's just select kind of one of these blues. Make it a little bit darker, let's say. You know, maybe you could go total black if you want. But now we've got some nice cloud shadows. You see the difference? It just helps the depth of those clouds to feel a little more natural. So zoom out and look at it. Looking pretty good. Okay. Alright, that's looking really nice. So let's go back and look at our reference again. And this is the shot of the Earth from the Apollo mission. Let's just zoom down into this area near the shadow. And if you'll notice, the clouds have depth. They're not just a flat kind of texture. They have height, varying heights among the clouds. So we want to use Photoshop to recreate that look on our own clouds. So let's go back. Let's duplicate our cloud layer again. And let's just turn off all the other clouds just so we can see what we're doing here. So we're going to name this cloud height. So what we want to do is run an emboss filter on this to kind of simulate that height effect. So let's go to Stylize, Emboss, and immediately you'll see if I really crank it up here, whoa, too much, but we get that kind of height effect. Now this is obviously way too much. So let's do a height of 1 or 2 pixels. But now you see the clouds have a nice texture and some height, and it may be a little too pronounced, but we're going to work on that here in a second. Also, you have an angle slider here, and since we know that our sun is coming from the upper right down, we don't want to have shadows on this edge, so we want to make sure our spinner is facing the appropriate direction so that now it looks like the light is coming in and striking that edge. Okay, so, and you can adjust the amount of height here by the slider. So for a more realistic look, let's just go somewhere around, say, 200. And now the emboss filter has kind of grayed the clouds out a bit, so we want them to actually be more white again, as you can see, especially down here, because Antarctica and the clouds. So let's go to Image, Adjustments, Levels. Let's just pull in our white level here and bring those clouds back up to a nice white. You know, don't go past the center here, just kind of a little ahead of it. And there you go, they're now back to white, but they have some thickness. And if we turn the cloud shadows back on, now we've really got some depth here in the clouds, but I still feel like those edges are a little too harsh. So what I do is I'm going to turn the original clouds back on that we had. And then on cloud height, I'm just going to kind of adjust that opacity down a little bit. So if we go all the way down, there's no height. We can turn it back on, just kind of like add that look back in. And if we go like around, I don't know, 50%, that seems like a good mix, so that you're not getting really harsh edges, but you are getting that height. So now our clouds very much have some nice depth. So now that we've got our clouds squared away, the ground is actually looking kind of flat in comparison to the clouds. So let's go ahead and make a duplicate copy of our ground. And let's do the same thing. Let's go to Filter, Stylize, Emboss, and we can just use our settings that we already had for the clouds. So you see it gives us some nice terrain height. So let's hit OK. And it kind of colorized it, so let's just go to Image, Adjustments, and Desaturate. And now we've got some nice contours anywhere there's ground. However, if you'll notice the edge of the continents, it looks like they're rising out of the ocean because of the height. So we don't want that. We do like the mountain detail in the middle, but we don't want those edges. So let's go back to our channels. You remember we had the alpha in here of the edges of the continent. So let's control click that again, go back to our layers, and we want to just, let's go in here for an example, we want to just bring that line in here a little bit so we can cut off that edge later. So let's just go to Select, Modify, expand. Now we want to expand, remember, because the ocean is what's selected, not the continents. So we're going to expand. You know, you can do 5 to 10 pixels. I'm going to do 10 just to be safe. And now we've got that selection inside. So let's go to select, modify, feather, and I'm going to feather it 10 as well. Now I'm going to hit delete and deselect. Let's zoom back out and look at what we've got. So as you can see, we've got that detail now, a really nice height detail, but it slopes off toward the edge of any continent. So to composite this over this, whoops, excuse me, I moved it there. So to composite this over our ground, you see our ground's pretty flat. All we need to do is switch this ground copy. We'll call this actually ground height. We just need to switch it to an overlay transfer mode. And as you see now, if I click it on and off, it adds some really nice height detail to our continents, which looks pretty cool. I'm just going to take its opacity down a little bit though, just to kind of make it a little more subtle. So probably around 70. And yeah, that's pretty good. Now we got some mountain range detail, which is pretty awesome. So let's zoom out again and turn our ocean specular back, excuse me, our specular reflection on the ocean back on. So now we've got a good look. Let's look at the Earth now full just to see what we've got. And we're really starting to get finished up here. Okay, so we want to add a couple more finishing touches here, and that's going to be another atmosphere layer we want to add. If you look at the Earth from space, the glancing edges have more atmosphere than the parts that are facing towards you because of the thickness of the atmosphere, you know, falling away from your line of sight. So we're going to mimic that effect on our Earth as well, and that's going to really help the look of it. So let's create a new layer. We're going to name it Atmosphere Fall Off. Okay. So let's again control click the ground so we have our circle selection. Let's fill this layer with black. Okay. And above it is the shadow layer. Let's just turn that off so we can see what we're doing here. Let's switch the foreground back to that blue color we want, and the blue color is going to be the 0, 128, 255 again. But that doesn't really matter because we're going to do it in a layer style. So let's go to Inner Glow. And at first you won't see anything because we're working on a 5K image, so this 5 pixel edge is really small. Let's change the blending mode to normal. Opacity all the way up to 100. Let's change this to that same blue color. So 0, 128, 255. Let's go ahead and drag into, okay, so now we're starting to get that fall off, right? And under technique, let's switch from softer to precise. That'll just give us a little more encroaching atmosphere there. And, you know, depending on the size of the document you're working on, you'll have to just adjust this to what you think it should be. But I'm going to go all the way to 250 because this is a fairly large document. And that now simulates the atmosphere kind of falling off and getting thicker away from our line of sight. So let's hit OK. Now, we need to get rid of this black we just filled. But instead of doing an alpha selection or a color range like we've been doing earlier, we're actually going to use the layers properties to do this. So double click the layer here and you'll see this blending options come up. And blend if gray, we want to leave that. We want to take the slider, and if you watch, if I start to bring this in, it's going to punch out the black and leave the blue. Okay? And that's exactly what we want. So all you have to do is drag it past a threshold of pure black and it'll composite that atmosphere right on top. So if we turn our shadow back on and then select deselect, now we've got our atmosphere fall off here. But that color is probably a little saturated. It's very, very blue. So let's go back into the color, and now we can kind of just adjust it as we see fit to kind of work with our Earth. You know, just kind of drag around till you find what you like. So I'm going to stop about right there. Okay. And this may just be a little too opaque, so I'm going to kind of drop that down just so it's subtly there. And now we've got a really nice fall. So here's the difference. Okay, that makes a pretty big difference. And I want kind of a little more atmosphere here too, so I'm just going to make another layer. Again, control click the ground, fill it with that same blue color. Okay. And And then I'm just going to really drop its opacity way, way down because we want to just be subtly there. Okay. We'll name this just atmosphere. Atmosphere. So now we've got atmosphere and atmosphere fall off adding to our color and our look. It's looking really great. Okay, so now we just have a couple more things to do. So let's go back and look at this Earth edge. Now if we go over here to the dark side of the Earth, you'll notice there's kind of a little edge or a line here, and that's just from the anti-aliased edges kind of building on top of each other. If we go to the lit side of the Earth, you know, that edge is pretty harsh. If you look at the Earth from space also, the edges are kind of soft because the atmosphere kind of hazes the edges out. So we want to do that on all of our layers. So what we're going to do is we're going to click, control click the ground to get our selection back. We're going to select, modify, contract, and we're going to go about, let's do 3 pixels. You know, again, this contraction amount will depend on how large your document is, but for this one we want to go in just about like that far. Then we want to go to select, modify, feather, again the same amount, 3. Now we want to zoom out so we can see what we're doing a little bit. Let's go to select, inverse. Now this selects out here into space, and on all the layers, the ground, the specular reflection, the clouds and the atmospheres. Now not on the shadow, don't touch the shadow, leave the shadow alone. So we're going to turn that off just for now. So now we actually have our whole Earth right with no shadow. So what we want to do is actually start deleting this edge. So we'll hit the delete key on the ground height, specular reflection, cloud shadow, clouds, cloud height, atmosphere fall off, and atmosphere. Now if I select, deselect, you'll notice now that edge is pretty nice and soft. If we turn our shadow back on, if we now go over here to this side of the Earth, there's no edge because we've feathered it in. Okay, so the very last thing we want to do here for the atmosphere is we want some atmosphere that kind of goes out into space. Okay, because the atmosphere hangs out above the surface of the Earth about 60 to 70 miles. So let's go to our bottom and let's make a new layer under the ground but before our space background. Let's just name it outer atmosphere. Let's control click the ground. Okay, now we have our selection back. And let's fill that, that outer atmosphere selection with black. Now you won't see it, but everything under the ground layer is filled with black. So let's deselect. Let's go to layer, layer style, and this time outer glow. And you'll see it kind of pop up there, but it's really subtle. So let's again take the opacity to 100. Blend mode to normal instead of screen. And let's just go back to our trusty blue color and we can adjust from there if we need to. 128, 255. Okay. And then let's just start expanding the atmosphere out. Now you could go pretty crazy with this, and a lot of times you'll see people really overdo this, but you have to remember the scale of the Earth. So the atmosphere would never ever go that far out from the Earth at this scale. So you need to really keep this really subtle. And I mean, of course there's artistic interpretation you could do, but I'm going to keep it probably around 13, just really subtle on that edge. So now if we zoom out and look at the Earth, we have this edge problem again. This is from the atmosphere extruding past the Earth. Now on the lit side, it looks great. But now we got to take care of this edge again. So what we can do is actually decouple our layer style from this layer. And the way you do that is you go up to layer, layer style, and you hit create layer. Now if you watch that layer down there, the outer atmosphere layer, it's going to separate the atmosphere now to be on its own. And this is the layer we created from, so we no longer need that. It can be trashed. And we just now have the atmosphere by itself. I'm going to turn off everything just to show you there. See? Then we can turn what we need to back on. Let's see, we got to turn off the specular. There, okay. So what we want to do is get rid of the atmosphere on the dark side of the Earth because it would never show up, obviously, because the sunlight is no longer illuminating it. So let's add a layer mask. Let's take a big feathered brush and let's just start erasing it, okay? And as you get toward where the shadow is, you want to just kind of subtly fade it right there. So I'm actually going to follow that contour and then just kind of, there you go. Now the atmosphere just kind of subtly fades off there. So I'm going to do that down here too. And I'm going to get right here on this terminator edge and just fade that out. So I can still see over here I've got a little bit of the underlayers peeking out from that shadow. So I'm just going to click the shadow and I control clicked it. I'm going to paint some black back over here just to cover that up a little more. And I'll have to deselect here to see, but if that didn't do it, I'm going to select the pixel out one. I'm going to expand out one pixel. Now, see, the edge is still there. Okay, so let's control click the shadow again. Let's go to select, modify, expand. Let's just do 2 pixels to be safe. And now I'm going to paint over that again. Now don't paint on this side, just where the shadow is. And we'll get rid of that edge. You know, sometimes you have to do this because the way layers stack and you just never know until you get to the end. But let's deselect that now and that edge should be gone. Yeah, okay, now we're good. Now we're just in the blackness of space. And of course, and realistically, you would only have the source light from the sun, but if you ever wanted to kind of see this area, you can just adjust the opacity of your shadow. If you kind of want to see, the dark side of the Earth. But of course, full realism would be that it would be completely black. So that's basically all we're going to do to the Earth as far as layers go, but we can do a couple of post-processing steps, and this is completely optional. I'm just going to do it to show it to you. So now that I've got what I like, I'm going to hide the space background because now I've got the Earth. I'm going to merge everything together, or merge visible, I should say. So merge visible. Now all of our layers are being computed together, and so now the Earth is just one layer. So I can go back and type Earth. Okay. If you remember earlier, we were talking about that that terminator edge having like a sunset. So what you can kind of do is just go to Image, Adjustments, Color Balance. And by default, it's going to be midtones, but if we hit Shadows and we drag our red up, if you go too far, you'll see it. It's too much, but you can kind of see it's adding that effect on the edge, but of course we don't want to go that far. But you can keep this subtle and just kind of go to, like, let's say 10 on the red. And then just to get a bit of orange in there, kind of like a sunset, let's just take this slider and drag the yellow down. Now you see you go too far again. But if you keep it subtle to, let's say, -10, then you get that cool, really cool sunset edge. So, okay. And the only other things I could mention here are really, if you want to just kind of flatten the image now, you can do that. And because we worked in such saturated colors, this Earth may look a little too vibrant. Of course, now it'd be fine to leave it like this, but I'm just going to go to Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. I'm just going to take the overall saturation just down a bit. Okay. So that's what we started with basically. So if we just want to pull it just down a little bit, like -20, let's say, now all the colors kind of become more natural and subtle. And that looks really, really nice now. And because of all those operations, the Earth is also a little sharp. So I'm just going to Filter, Blur, and just do a subtle Gaussian blur. 1 is probably too high, but maybe a 0.5. And that just softens it out. So that's basically it. That's how you make an Earth in Photoshop. Once again, I'm Daniel Broadway, and I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below, and I'll try to get back to you. Thanks.